Picture this, a dusty, sun-baked border town, a place so small it barely makes it on the map. The town's name? Numbnut. It's the kind of place where tumbleweeds have more personality than the townsfolk. But today, Numbnut is the stage for a tale of stolen cargo, unlikely alliances, and a father-son duo with the strangest names you've ever heard. Meet Skinny Gandalf, a wiry, sun-weathered character who's seen 68 summers and doesn't look a day over 90. He's got a sparkle in his roomy eyes that says he's seen it all, done it all, and lived to tell the tale. At his side, his 25-year-old son, Weed Goblin. Now don't let the name fool you. Weed Goblin is as sharp as a tack and twice as prickly. These two are not your average father-son duo. Nope, they're in the business of smuggling nose candy, and they're good at it. But every now and then, even the best get outplayed. And that's where our story begins. Their shipment, a whopping 1,000 kilos of the finest nose candy, was swiped right under their noses by a cartel led by a man known only as El Mustard. El Mustard is a notorious figure around these parts. You mention his name, and even the toughest hombres swallow hard. He's got a reputation for being ruthless, cunning, and, well, fond of mustard. But that's a story for another time. So, there they were, Skinny Gandalf and Weed Goblin stranded in Numbnut. Their cargo was gone, their truck was stolen, and all they had left was their wits and a mighty thirst. A thirst that could only be quenched at the local watering hole, the Numbnut Bar. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a wild adventure. And so there they were, stranded in the middle of Numbnut, with nothing but their wits and a mighty thirst. And what's a stranded smuggler to do in a town like Numbnut? Why, find the nearest watering hole, of course. Now, the Numbnut Bar isn't your typical swanky joint. No siree. It's the kind of place where you'd find a grizzled old-timer, nursing a whiskey at the counter, while the jukebox in the corner plays a never-ending loop of Johnny Cash. Skinny Gandalf and Weed Goblin made their way in, their faces as grim as a stormy sky. The barkeep, a burly woman with a no-nonsense attitude, served them their poison, and they settled into the worn-out wooden stools. In the dimly lit bar, Weed Goblin's eyes caught a familiar figure. It was Droon, an old school buddy he hadn't seen in about half a decade. With a grin as wide as the Grand Canyon, Weed Goblin sauntered over to his old mate. The reunion was warm, filled with laughter, slaps on the back, and a few shots of tequila to seal the deal. As the night wore on and the tequila flowed, tongues got looser. The two smugglers found themselves sharing their tale of woe with Droon. Their predicament was like a country song. Lost their stash, lost their truck, and stuck in the middle of nowhere. Droon, after hearing their plight, did what any good friend would do. He offered to help. But this wasn't some charity work. No, sir. Droon was a businessman at heart, and he demanded his fair share. 10% of the money, he said, and he'd help them retrieve their nose candy. Skinny Gandalf and Weed Goblin, desperate as they were, agreed. And just like that, our dynamic duo became a terrific trio. Their spirits lifted, they toasted to new alliances and old friendships, their laughter echoing in the otherwise silent bar. With a new ally in tow, our dynamic duo felt a glimmer of hope. Little did they know, the night was just beginning. Morning in Numbnut hit like a freight train, and it brought with it a startling revelation. Our sleep-deprived trio found themselves squinting at the morning sun, their heads filled with dreams of reacquiring their lost cargo. But not all dreams are meant to be sweet. See, the first thing they noticed was their ride, a Ford F-150. Now don't get me wrong, it's a fine machine, but it ain't exactly what you'd expect for a high-stakes, border-crashing, candy-recovering mission, now is it? Weed Goblin, with his eyes wide and mouth agape, turned to Droon and asked, "Okay, funny joke. Now where's the real vehicle?" Droon, with a shrug and a smirk, replied, "This is what we're dealing with for now." You could almost hear the collective gulp of disbelief. But hey, when life gives you lemons, right? Their initial shock soon gave way to planning. Weed Goblin, in his infinite wisdom, remembered something crucial. He had a tracker on the cargo, a beacon of hope in their seemingly dire situation. And wouldn't you know it, the cargo was still in Mexico. Skinny Gandalf and Weed Goblin were no strangers to border crossing. It was like a walk in the park for them. But Droon? Well, let's just say he was about to get a crash course in Smuggling 101. Despite the daunting task ahead, there was a strange sense of excitement in the air. Call it the thrill of the chase, or the allure of the forbidden, Or maybe it was just the lingering effect of last night's tequila. As they loaded up the Ford F-150, their minds were buzzing with strategies, escape routes, and contingency plans. Skinny Gandalf, the seasoned veteran, took the wheel. Weed Goblin, the tech whiz, manned the tracker. And Droon, well, he was just trying to keep his breakfast down. With the border looming ahead, the trio steeled themselves for the journey of a lifetime. Crossing the border for seasoned smugglers like Skinny Gandalf and Weed Goblin was a walk in the park. For Droon, however, it was a whole new ballgame. Now, imagine a Chihuahua trying to pass as a German Shepherd at a dog show. That was Droon, trying to blend in with our professional smugglers. He had that deer-in-the-headlights look. You know, the one you get when you're not sure if you left the stove on at home, but you're already halfway to Mexico. And then there was Skinny Gandalf and Weed Goblin, cool as cucumbers, strutting around like they owned the place. Well, until they had to deal with customs. You could almost see the gears turning in Skinny Gandalf's head as he tried to remember if he'd left any nose candy in his pockets. And Weed Goblin, well, let's just say he was sweating so much you could have filled a kiddie pool. Then there was the language barrier. Sure, Skinny Gandalf could speak Spanish, but the only phrases he knew were from a telenovela he used to watch. So there he was, trying to convince the Border Patrol he wasn't smuggling drugs, but was instead on his way to win back the love of his life from his evil twin. And Weed Goblin? He just nodded and said sigh, like a broken bobblehead. But somehow, against all odds, they made it through. Maybe it was Skinny Gandalf's dramatic telenovela monologue, or Droon's innocent charm, or maybe the Border Patrol was just too busy laughing to notice anything suspicious. Either way, they crossed that border, hearts pounding, adrenaline pumping. As they drove away, Weed Goblin let out a whoop of triumph. Skinny Gandalf started humming a victory tune. And Droon, well, Droon just passed out from the stress of it all. They had made it across, but the real challenge was just beginning. El Mustard's place was a fortress, but our trio was undeterred. They had a mission, and they would see it through. As they approached, the air was thick with tension, like a hot dog at a vegan barbecue. Skinny Gandalf, with his years of smuggling wisdom, led the charge, while Weed Goblin and Droon followed like two lost puppies in a thunderstorm. They found their cargo, a mountain of nose candy, shining like a beacon in the dingy warehouse. It was a sight that would bring a tear to any smuggler's eye. But celebrations were cut short, as they realized they'd have to leave their trusty Ford F-150 behind. The smuggling truck was their only ticket out of there. Just as they were getting comfortable in their old ride, El Mustard's goons spotted them. The air was filled with the sound of bullets, like an angry swarm of bees on steroids. In the chaos, Droon took a hit to the leg. He thought it was just a bee sting, probably from one of those steroid bees. But he was wrong. Despite the hailstorm of bullets, our trio managed to break free from the fortress. Skinny Gandalf expertly maneuvered the truck, weaving through the onslaught like a snake in a field of mice. Weed Goblin was his co-pilot, guiding them away from the danger with his tracker. And Droon, poor Droon, was in the back, nursing a wound that was more than just a bee sting. With their cargo and a wounded Droon, they sped away, leaving El Mustard's fortress in their rearview mirror. The fortress, once a symbol of their defeat, now stood as a monument to their daring escape. But the journey was far from over. They had a border to cross, a cargo to deliver, and a friend to save. The stakes were high, and time was running out. But they had a mission, and by golly, they would see it through. They were on the road again, but with a ticking time bomb in the backseat. Skinny Gandalf and Weed Goblin hightailed it across the barren landscape, their hearts pounding in sync with the gravel crunching beneath their tires. Droon was in the back, clutching his thigh, his face pale as a ghost bedsheet. The nose candy was safe, but their friend was not. Every passing minute seemed to chip away at Droon's vitality like a relentless sculptor carving into a block of ice. His laughter, once vibrant and contagious, now echoed in their ears like the haunting refrain of a swan song. As the miles rolled on, Droon's condition worsened. His breaths came out ragged, his skin grew clammy, and his eyes glazed over. The poison from the bullet was spreading, turning their friend into a shell of his former self. Skinny Gandalf kept one eye on the road and the other on the rearview mirror, watching Droon's spirit slip away with each passing mile. Meanwhile, Weed Goblin, ever the optimist, tried to lighten the mood. He cracked jokes, told stories, anything to keep Droon from slipping away. But as the sun began to set, The gravity of their situation became impossible to ignore. Finally, they found themselves on the outskirts of a small town. But it was too late. Droon, the courageous and loyal friend, had breathed his last. Skinny Gandalf pulled over and they sat there, in the silence of the night, mourning their lost friend. The air was thick with sorrow, their hearts heavy with grief. In the cold light of the moon, they said their goodbyes. They thanked Droon for his courage, his humor, his friendship. They made promises to remember him, to honor his memory, to keep his spirit alive. They had made it back, but at a great cost. Droon was gone, and they were left with a heavy load of grief and nose candy. The road ahead was clear, but the journey was far from over. The journey was far from over. They still had to deliver the cargo, and they were running on fumes. Skinny Gandalf and Weed Goblin, our unlikely heroes, were now on the final leg of their epic journey. Their hearts were heavy with the loss of Droon, yet they knew they had to keep going. The road stretched out before them like a never-ending ribbon, the moon casting long shadows over the desolate landscape. Their cargo was safe, but they were still far from their buyer. The nose candy, a mountain of it, sat quietly in the back, its presence a constant reminder of the ordeal they had been through. They felt a sense of urgency, a need to finish what they had started. The truck rumbled on, eating up the miles, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Skinny Gandalf, his face etched with lines of worry and exhaustion, gripped the steering wheel tightly. Beside him, Weed Goblin, ever the optimist, tried to lighten the mood. "Hey, Skinny," he said, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Remember that time when we smuggled 100 kilos of candy floss thinking it was nose candy? The buyer's face when he opened the cargo." They shared a hearty laugh, the memory easing the tension, if only for a moment. As the dawn broke, they reached their destination. The buyer, a shadowy figure, awaited them. The transaction was swift and smooth. The weight of the nose candy exchanged for the weight of cold, hard cash. They had done it. The mission was accomplished, but as they drove away, their pockets heavy with cash, their hearts were heavier with the loss they had endured. They had paid a steep price for this victory. With their mission accomplished and their pockets heavier, they couldn't help but feel the sting of their loss. The memory of Droon would forever be etched in their hearts. And so our tale comes to a close. But remember, every end is just a new beginning. As the dust settles on the horizon, Skinny Gandalf and Weed Goblin, heroes of our tale, find themselves back in Mexico, back where it all began. Their journey has been one for the books, filled with trials, triumphs, and a whole lot of nose candy. They've danced with danger, crossed paths with cartels, and even made a pit stop at the numbnut bar. And through it all, they've managed to keep their sense of humor intact. Now they stand at the precipice of a new journey. With a sparkle in their eyes and a truckload of adventures behind them, they're ready for whatever comes next. They've faced El Mustard, they've braved the border, and they've even mastered the art of smuggling in a Ford F-150. As the sun sets on our duo, we can't help but wonder, what's next for Skinny Gandalf and Weed Goblin? Only time will tell.